Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News, or our monthly Ethereum update with our friend Anthony. How are you going today, Anthony?
Hey mate, I'm good. Excited to talk about Ethereum again.
Yeah, we're talking the pre-interview, and for those that don't know at home, Anthony and I just sort of jot down all the cool stuff that's happening throughout the month, and then we get together and flesh it out and let you guys know. So that's how it all works. In the last couple of weeks, there's just been so much happening in the DeFi space and Ethereum ecosystem, which we're going to get into today. So anything, just a general overview of the month before we dive into the specifics, Anthony?
I think like the biggest events over the last month were, a few different things. I think the ETH futures going live was pretty big. It was a pretty big signal from like the traditional world that they're starting to take ETH, the asset, a lot more seriously. We had Visa put out a patent, that mentioned Ethereum, like a patent application that mentioned Ethereum for a new payment network, which was quite big as well. And then of course we had the Reddit things as well, where there was a Reddit kind of community point system going to be built on Ethereum. So yeah, there's so much happening. We're gonna dive into it, but I think those stood out to me as like the biggest things that happened.
Yeah, and I know we often don't talk about price and we focus on the technology, and I think price will come. But in the last week or so, there's been a lot of research come out about possibly all these metrics pointing to Ethereum being undervalued. And I actually did the stock to flow. I don't know if you saw that tweet I put up, but in theory now, with ETH issuance reducing to proof of stake and all these arguments around stock to flow that the Bitcoiners love, these can be made for Ethereum becoming better money, better monetary policy. And it's stock to flow isn't the only thing that gives Bitcoin value. Obviously, there's hundreds of things that give something value and price. But I think just ETH's monetary policy is changing and more people are realizing that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I did see your tweet. It's funny because stock to flow has been like a pretty contentious thing in the community, even in the Bitcoin community, where it's popular because it shows Bitcoin going to like a really high price. But then the skeptics are basically saying that you're not really showing anything. You're trying to predict demand for the asset, basically. Yes, okay, the stock comes down because of the halvenings, but you can't predict how much demand there's going to be for an asset. Like that's just basically impossible. So for me, I'm more buying into the fact that we just need to increase, like overall, no matter what we do, just increase demand for the asset, right? You can make all the models in the world that you want, but as if the asset doesn't have demand, it can be as scarce as you want it to be as well. Like, but if the asset doesn't have demand, then it's not going to go up in price. That's like the fundamental kind of thing, right? So in my opinion, I think and I saw the tweet from, I think Spencer Noon put it out yesterday, a nice tweet storm about all these metrics of Ethereum growing and things like that. So that to me speaks to demand. Like we're driving demand for like ETH to be used as gas. Like there's been high gas fees, but that just means people are using like ETH to pay for gas, for fees. We have DeFi collateral, all those sorts of things. There's staking coming online. So from my view, just increasing demand for the asset kind of outstrips any of that stock to flow stuff. Because if you think back to 2017, ETH went to 1400 and its inflation was way higher than it is today. So demand just is all that matters in my eyes at the end of the day.
Yeah. So what Anthony's saying is that him and I can start a coin, a Nugget coin or an Anthony coin, and give it a better stock to flow, but it's all the other things that give it value. So I think the takeaway is that if you have an asset that is valuable, whether it's shares or gold or ether, the less supply of it or inflation is, the more scarce it is. I guess that is a positive, but it's not just the only thing. And that's probably an important point that you touched on about the gas fees at the moment. So it's funny because Bitcoiners and the ETH and the tribalism, and now we've got really high Bitcoin fees again. And I just did an episode on that. I think it's going to be up yesterday for those that are watching this now, because this is going to be out on Friday, trying to calculate all this in my head. But yeah, we've talked about the scaling and whatnot, and Ethereum's got a lot going on in terms of its scaling as well. So the gas fees, the network fees are really high on ETH. That's not good for a lot of the apps. But any general thoughts on that before we talk about some of these specific scaling solutions that have had really cool results so far?
Yeah, it's definitely a hot issue over the last few weeks, especially because the network's being clogged with scams and Ponzi schemes, which obviously isn't something that we want, but we can't really do anything about it. I did put a tweet thread out the other day. It was a short thread, basically saying that I don't think the high gas fees are a bad thing. It's definitely going to encourage more a layer 2 adoption. It's going to encourage developers to be more efficient with their code so that it doesn't cost as much to process it. There's all these things happening. And I made the point that kind of, if you're involved with crypto, Ethereum, DeFi, whatever today, you're kind of a pioneer. And you kind of, I guess, have to expect that these things are going to happen. Like, you're not in the kind of like iPhone, you're not starting at iPhone 10, right? You're starting at the first iPhone, basically. You're starting with all the kinks, everything that wasn't working well. And we're just going to keep iterating and bringing out all these new features, new upgrades. And you'll be along for the ride. It's really fun to be along for the ride. But there is, some growing pains for sure.
Yeah, so let's maybe... Well, one thing I just wanted to get you to explain for people at home as well is the elastic block size and how there's like a gas limit and how that's sort of different from Bitcoin that has a 1 megabyte block. Once it's full, it's full. So do you want to explain how that works with Ethereum?
Yeah, without diving too far into the technical details behind it, there's a gas limit on each block in Ethereum, so it kind of works like a block size limit, like you said, like in Bitcoin. But in Ethereum, there's a mechanism where the miners can actually vote to kind of increase the gas limit, and this increases network capacity. But what this also does, it will also adds more kind of, I guess you could call it bloat to the chain or size to the overall chain, which makes it harder to sync a full node. So the gas limit like a few months ago was 8 million. Then it was voted up to 10 million, which means we added 20% more capacity on the network. And there's talk about getting them to move it up again, but they're just temporary fixes. It's not a permanent fix, and it's not great for long-term growth of the chain either. So, but that mechanism definitely, does exist to have some kind of short-term relief in times of like very, very high congestion. At the moment, it's congested, but it's, people are still using it, right? There's it's not like people have stopped using all these apps because of it.
No. So just to give people some comparisons, back in December 2017, when Bitcoin was super congested, you had to pay like $50 to get in the next transaction. And a lot of people had no idea what was going on and paying $50 to send $5, things like that. Similar happened to Ethereum at times when we were doing ICOs and everyone wanted to pile in. So the whales were paying $1,000 to get $20,000 of a coin that they knew was going to double. So there was just crazy stuff going on. But what Bitcoin can't do is say, okay, let's increase it to 2 megabytes just for 6 hours and see if we can clear that bloat or backlog that Anthony's talking about. We can do that in Ethereum, but if you do that, it means that all the nodes have got to download twice as much information. So we don't want a huge blockchain that no one else can download and sync up to and all that, really, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. And I do think there's a limit on how high that the miners can vote up this gas limit. I'm not sure on what that limit is, but I don't think they can just like do it, to infinity, basically.
And the Ponzi scheme is an interesting one. It's kind of like they disrespect the chain, or they use it in such a bad way that it takes up so much gas, doesn't it?
Yeah, they don't care. They're just there like mercenaries, basically. Come in, grab as much money as they can before they get shut down, because they know eventually they'll get shut down, and then, peace out.
Abusing the chain, taking up that precious resource. So let's dive into some of these cool scaling solutions. Most people are probably familiar with, say, Lightning Network on Bitcoin. One of my old favorites, I think it's been around for 5 years now, is the Aragon network. And I was on that Reddit and they were talking about how their mainnet, I think it's on the public Ethereum chain now, but they're still ironing out a few kinks before they go big with a public announcement. So that was really interesting for me because that's a token that a lot of people maybe thought was dead or price has been hammered. And then I was reading that apparently it's all going well and they're getting ready to launch that mainnet.
Yeah, it's funny. There are old projects from 2017 that have tokens, and people are still holding out, and are monitoring the project closely, but they've been quiet. Like Raden's one of them. Omise Go is another one. I put out a tweet the other day and got hammered about it because I basically said that most people holding OMG right now are in loss. But in saying that, for me, I hadn't heard much about Omise Go or Raiden in a while, in a very long time, to be honest. And I pay a lot of attention, obviously, to the Ethereum ecosystem. But if these teams aren't doing marketing or getting people to share their updates, then I'm just not going to hear about it. So I think state and going back to Raiden with the state channels, I think their state channels as a scaling solution is still viable, still being worked on. But it's, there's a lot of research still going on, so they're not very loud about it. There's another project called K Channels that I recently saw that are also doing it. It's state channels, for those who don't know, is a similar concept to the Lightning Network, basically payment channels on top of like a layer 2 basically. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I was just going to say there was another one when we were at EdCon last year. Was it called Layer 2 Solutions? Those guys, the way that they were explaining it was it's like a game of chess. And instead of every move having to be on the blockchain, Anthony and I can play our game of chess on that Layer 2 and then sort of report back who wins. So it's a way of creating like a bar tab, if you want to think of it that way, or something similar. But it's funny you say you haven't heard of it. I hadn't really either. We've recently partnered up with Sentiment. Have you seen those guys on Twitter putting out the reports? One of their premium reports had the coins that they thought had a lot of good on-chain looking activity with like whales holding and people accumulating. And another report was like top 10 by dev activity. And Raiden and Amisigo were in that list. And that was the only reason that I picked up on both of these early. Amisigo had a huge run, and again, some people say, you got lucky and whatnot, but that was why, thanks to their research. But I also agree that I bought plenty of Amisigo at $6 thinking it was the bottom, and and here we are underwater still. So
yeah, it's always funny when I see a lot of the stuff that Sentiment puts out, and I actually think it's really great. I like the on-chain stuff for sure. I think the Amisigo thing, definitely getting added to Coinbase was a very big catalyst for that pump. I watched that and I was like, this is crazy. But I guess the more these projects ship, like the token's naturally just gonna probably appreciate. And I think these older tokens probably have a lot of holders that are just not in crypto anymore, right? They got burned from 2017, and that might be a good thing because like that supply isn't available to be kind of like dumped right now. So
yeah, and I definitely should mention that the Coinbase listing obviously has a huge role to play. I think it pumped to like $7 on Coinbase, whereas it got to $2, which I was excited about on the chart that I was looking at. But I just want to mention that these are the projects that are kind of a bit more trusted in the community. They're more likely to get added to Coinbase. I feel they're way more likely for the venture funds to take a position, like in something like Synthetics or Rocket Pool and these projects. It's not just like a new IEO that was, from this, that, or the other team. These are projects that were close to Ethereum from the beginning, and that's what gives VCs, venture capitalists, confidence to invest.
Yeah, there definitely is like a protected class of these assets that you can kind of, I wouldn't say guarantee, but there's like a high chance they get added to Coinbase or some of the other reputable exchanges just because of the connections in the space. It really is like that. It's the same in any kind of like setting. It's like it's who you know at the end of the day. And a lot of those projects were very close with other people who worked on projects that was close with VCs, and you have that whole circle there.
Yeah, and it's very speculative. We've got to just highlight that every episode, guys. It's super, super speculative. They can go to zero as well as go up a lot. Let's talk about some of those other scaling solutions. So Reddit came out with their little rewards token, which is similar to the Ethereum ETH trader subreddit that had their own little donut rewards tokens. But that has already maybe started to get people worried about the congestion, which we just spoke about. And then we had Fuel Labs come out and say, check out this optimistic roll-up, which is one of these new scaling techniques that we can do it, and this is going to really scale things. And that's where, from start to finish, it's kind of exciting to see this happen.
Yeah, so the Reddit community points thing came out, a few weeks ago. They announced that they were going to be giving away some of these points on the cryptocurrency subreddit and the Fortnite subreddit as well, which is really cool. So, but at the moment, the implementation's on the Ethereum testnet, so it's not actually doing anything on the main Ethereum chain. Basically, they did that so that people could claim their tokens, and then eventually when when Reddit is kind of ready, they can port this over to main Ethereum net and just copy it over, basically, like just credit it to everyone on the main chain. And then, as you said, Fuel Labs came out with this implementation of basically, I think they called it Reddit Cash or something like that, where you could use their optimistic rollup tech to do kind of like a layer 2 thing with these Reddit community points. And I think, like, I was discussing this with a few friends, and I was like, you can't put this on mainnet because Reddit can't cover the gas cost. The gas cost would be extremely high. It'd cost them a lot of money. The user experience would be bad in that case because users would have to pay a lot of money. So the only logical solution in my mind is to either have a centralized database that tracks everything, which kind of defeats the purpose, or do a layer 2 implementation. And and then a week later, Fuel Labs comes out with this, and I'm like, oh, well, people are already thinking about it and doing it. This is really cool.
Yeah. So I really want people to understand this at home. If we have 1 million users on the ETH subreddit, for example, and people are upvoting and commenting and they're moving around these tokens, we simply can't have that on Ethereum that can do 15 transactions a second. This is the big problem that blockchains are facing. So if we can say, Fuel Labs can say, hey, Reddit, turn this into a side chain, and people can say, well, that's a good trade-off to make. We don't need the Ethereum blockchain's security and all that just for reputation points and everything, really. If people are happy with that, let's have it as a layer 2 thing that we can scale up and report back to the main Ethereum chain what our balances are at the end of each day, or even less, whatever someone wants to cash out. So that's how these sort of trade-offs and the ecosystem is developing, really, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I think you put it well by calling it kind of a side chain. Side chain has got a few different meanings, but to me, it kind of means that like you're putting your assets somewhere that isn't secured by the base chain. So like an exchange is a side chain in my mind, right? When you send like your ETH to an exchange, you're giving it to them. You don't have the keys anymore, which means it's not secured by the Ethereum blockchain. It's like basically an entry in a database. And I think and you made the point that like people don't need like high security for these assets on Ethereum all the time, so they can basically trust these Reddit to keep it secure, and then when they want to cash out, they just withdraw to Ethereum, and then that's how they sell it.
And then you start to think about the trade-offs of like the centralization. Are you going to trust Reddit? Which maybe we'll dive into that now, because we've seen during the week, well, Trump's come out and said that he's going to shut down Twitter if they don't let him post his political opinions. But then Google Drive were taking down videos, and I think it was the documents or files that, again, didn't agree with their narrative. So there's all this censorship happening. We've seen it happen on YouTube a lot, touch wood. A lot of these guys getting taken down for all sorts of different reasons. And there's some very big YouTube channels now that are saying, hey, we need to start up some sort of unstoppable platform. We've already kind of seen that with some other projects like Library, D-Tubes and that. But I really think that this is another opportunity for Ethereum, and just it speaks to the whole need for decentralized platforms on social media.
Yeah, this is a really tricky thing to talk about, I think, and you can go really deep into a rabbit hole talking about this, where when you talk about censorship or centralization or what platforms can do. Like obviously, private companies reserve the right to do even public companies like reserve the right to do anything on their platform, right? They can ban you or me; it's in their terms of service, and we have no recourse. And that's obviously bad for us, like people who aren't scammers or just trying to educate, things like that. But it's good that they have that power for scammers. Like that's the thing. Like I think an unmoderated social platform turns into like a really bad place. We see that with, I guess, like I personally don't mind going on places like 4chan and things like that. I find it funny, but those places are filled with garbage. It's really bad. And that's an unmoderated platform. So if you take that and put it on like Twitter and don't police anything, then you're going to get these results. But talking about the decentralization side of it, I do think decentralizing file storage is a really great use case. And we've obviously got Swarm on Ethereum, which people probably haven't heard of. It's like a file sharing protocol on Ethereum. And then Filecoin, which is something that people might have heard of. IPFS, which was made by the Filecoin team. But that comes with its own host of problems, where there are files that can be hosted there that are illegal material, basically, not just for censorship reasons, but I mean, I don't have to go into the material that's illegal, but so it is a slippery slope, I guess, but I think that we're going to get there, and there's going to be alternatives deployed.
Yeah, so decentralized file storage and decentralized computing are two of the things that I am just so bullish on, because you hear these fund managers talking about how they're investing in projects doing this in the traditional world, but then you think, well, taking it a step further, this is one step ahead of them, decentralizing it and giving the power to the protocol, and the value will accrue there. So yeah, I think storage, SIA, Filecoin, there's things that I'd certainly have a big interest in. Other than that, we saw Loopring. They've now done 1 million trades in 3 months using ZK rollups. So again, similar technology, scaling. They can do this on their DEX, a decentralized exchange on a second layer, and now do millions of trades rather than waiting for Ethereum to do it on the old, what was it, Ether Delta, click and wait.
Yeah. Loopring's been great. They're going great. I think they're slowly growing. Just need to get more liquidity into their exchange for people to want to trade on there more. But yeah, it's great to see that they're actually on mainnet with this scaling solution. And Synthetics also did their kind of like demo version over the past few weeks. That just ended. That went really well. So as I said, like at the start, we're going to be seeing more and more teams do this out of necessity. There was a kind of a discussion I was having with someone on Twitter about, if high gas fees persist, people are just going to go to another chain. I'm like, I don't think so. I think developers would opt to build on layer 2 Ethereum rather than go to another chain that may not have the users, right? The users are what matters to everyone at the end of the day. If you want to deploy on another chain because of high gas fees, and then you get no users, your company's going to die anyway. So your protocol is not going to get any use anyway. So better to stay on the chain and work with what we've got, in my mind.
For something that's super basic, if there's nothing to change for them, like the example I'm thinking of is if ETH is super busy and I just want to send Tether from one exchange to another, well, maybe I do use the, God forbid, the Tron version or the Algo version because I don't really care. It's just turning up in my account. But for actual projects, they're not going to make that change. And as you say, Synthetics, one of our favorites, is now using the optimistic roll-ups, that virtual machine. I need to get Kane on to talk us through all that as well. But now we've got those different techniques. These leading projects like the Gods Unchained, the card game, they've got a cool scaling solution. Synthetics, Loopring, Amisagoa getting ready for their mainnet. Raiden is out. So it's just kind of all coming together where once I'm imagining it from you, I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this. Once you've got these first projects, develop it. I assume it's easier for other people to plug in or copy the open source code and sort of implement it all.
Yeah, well, that's it exactly. Because it's open source, all the hard work that's being done over the last couple of years on Ethereum scaling is going to be available to everyone. It's Vitalik put a tweet out the other day saying that all this research around Ethereum layer 2 and ETH2 has been going on in the background for years. And for most people, it's going to seem like it came out of nowhere and it's an overnight kind of thing. But for everyone in the know, they knew it was coming. It's just that it took a long time to get here because of just the nature of the space that we're in. But yeah, it's going to be amazing to see how many developers quickly, latch onto this and think, okay, well, now that the tech's there, it's really easy for me to build, really easy for me to deploy. It's a no-brainer. Let's just do it. Let's just pull the Band-Aid off, get it done, migrate our users across, and it's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to the next kind of year or so in Ethereum scaling. Outside of all the ETH2 stuff, like this is happening on ETH1, right? Then we also have ETH2, so yeah, it's hard not to be kind of bullish on the whole space right now.
Yeah, and that was probably the next question. We have spoken about ETH 2.0 in the past, and I've got that full video if anyone needs that explanation. But we've got to the stage now where we've got multi-clients. What's the update there from last month?
Yeah, so we had the multi-client testnet Schlessie running for a few weeks, and then it broke, which is great. That's what we wanted to see happen. It kind of like it was a consensus bug. So the clients kind of got out of sync, and we had to kind of fix it. I think it was yesterday, Afri, an Ethereum community member, he ran the relaunch of the next multi-client testnet called Witty. This is aiming. I don't think this is like the final one just yet. The one that will lead us to mainnet launch, but it's another step with all the fixes in, making sure that we can run this for a while. And if there's no bugs, great. If there is, even better, because we need to catch them before mainnet. So yeah, the progress is basically we're just in testing phase now. And if we can go, maybe 2 to 3 months with no bugs or no critical issues, then we can be confident enough to launch the mainnet chain.
And that's what they were talking about. I think they're still saying July, aren't they? Ideally. But even that is still a phase 0 with not a lot of money or apps, contracts at risk.
I'd say July for a mainnet launch is off the table at this point. Okay. I would say that maybe like if next month, it's hard to put dates on these things because, as I said, we don't know if something's going to break. So in my mind, if we launch the final multi-client testnet next month, sometime in June, and then it runs for 2 to 3 months with no critical issues, we could see a mainnet launch in maybe like September. Right. But it's just the nature of it. Like obviously the developers and the researchers don't want to deploy this thing without thorough testing because it's real money that's going to be at stake once it's on mainnet.
Yeah, I think I've said this in the past. It's one of the reasons why sort of Bitcoin is so slow and hesitant in doing any upgrades because there's over $100 billion. People forget there's tens of billions of dollars at stake for Ethereum, and they're trying to move fast and break things. And these are headlines that might come out, and everyone goes, oh no, testnet, there's another bug, it's meant to launch next month, it's delayed, and the price can go down and just create this real bad sentiment again. But guys, when you listen to the whole conversation, I don't think there's anything to be like worried about.
Yeah, one piece of advice I'd give to everyone watching is don't look at the headlines at all for any dates about anything. That's probably the worst. This update that we do for you guys will give you the most up-to-date information, and even checking out the newsletter that ETH Hub puts out as well will give you the most up-to-date information. The headlines are there for clickbait. It's the same as any kind of,
Yes.
same as any kind of like media that likes to get clickbait. So yeah,
Absolutely.
It's unfortunate, but yeah.
yeah. Okay, so moving on, other chains that have launched, there's always the next Ethereum killer, but some of these have got a fair bit of support behind them. I think Nia Protocol, Polkadot, and Cosmos, these were originally more sort of interoperability with Ethereum, weren't they? And now there's, some people say there's a bit of bad blood there, and they're still going to be interoperable and complementary. So, yeah, how do you think about all that, Anthony?
I think that every kind of chain is in competition with each other for everything, right? For, investment capital, right? There's it's when an investor looks at something, they're going to be like, okay, how much am I going to put into ETH? How much am I going to put into like Polkadot or Cosmos or whatever? Dev as well, Dev Mindshare users, like there's only a limited pool of those at the moment. So at the end of the day, I do think that it's basically, I think I've said this before, it's basically Ethereum, and then underneath you have all the other ones fighting amongst each other to challenge Ethereum. None of them are at the point where I think they pose a challenge, and I don't think they, at this stage, I personally don't believe that they ever will pose a challenge. If EOS couldn't do it with their massive war chest, I don't see how these other ones are going to be able to do it. They may carve out their own niche, which may increase the price of their token or whatever. But in terms of DeFi and the most high value use cases, I don't think those other chains are going to be able to capture it from Ethereum unless Ethereum screws up totally, right? Unless there's like constant delays of ETH2 and this never gets shipped, and the chain grinds to a halt because of really high gas fees and nothing happens, which doesn't seem like it's going to happen to me.
Yeah. And I mean, for the traders out there, or even sort of medium-term investors, that doesn't mean that these things can't do really well. Like EOS went from 50 cents to $30, even into crypto winter when everything else was struggling, and they had a $4 billion war chest, and still they're sort of mucking up and fighting over the governance and whatnot. So look, anyone can be a winner, anything can happen, but these are just the realities of the real world that projects face. So speaking of governance, that was the next thing I want to touch on, Aragon. So Aragon is a DAO project, so decentralized autonomous organization. So they're trying to build businesses, companies, projects that are, I guess, controlled by everyone, all the token holders. Now, it's almost like so cliche, isn't it, that they're being sued by someone or they're suing someone. So do you want to explain what's going on there, Anthony?
Yeah, Aragon's been around for a while. I originally saw them in 2017. I actually invested in the ICO back then and things like that. I thought the idea was really cool, but I think what happens is that I know that the Aragon people are young, and young people tend to be very naive sometimes about different things, especially when it comes to how the world works. So I think what happened was they have all these grand ideas about how they want to kind of reimagine how the world works. They want to deploy like a court system on Ethereum through Aragon that can be used for, decentralized disputes and organizing things and stuff like that, which I commend them for. Like, the effort's great. They've delivered a lot of stuff. It's not like they're not building. But recently we saw that there's been a bit of drama around the grants that they give out over the last few months. They had like a thing called Aragon Nest, where they used their war chest, which was a lot because they raised in, I think it was early 2017, and then the ETH price went up a lot, obviously. But they were giving this away to teams as like grant money. And then apparently on 2 or 3 occasions, they actually backtracked on the money that they were going to give to teams. And then these teams were like, well, that's insane. What's going on? We're going to sue you. And then Aragon's like, oh, okay, we're going to counter sue you now. But Aragon, the kind of like decentralized protocol, isn't suing anyone, right? It's the kind of like team that's part of like a centralized company that builds on the protocol that's doing this lawsuit. It really is a mess, and it kind of goes against their ideals, I guess, in my mind, of like they were trying to escape this centralized kind of court system and the legal system, but now they're going back there to sue someone. Like, it's just a bad look in my eyes.
Oh yeah, 100%. I do think that DAOs have risen in popularity. We've seen Kyber go down that route, and I think it is something that is powerful and being experimented with. And I quite like that someone like Tim Draper invested a lot of money in Aragon recently. I think it might have even been $1 million. Maybe he sort of sees that potential in an old head, a business mind. That's what they maybe need around them, because I think they've already pivoted to some degree into other things. So I think there's a lot of promise there, but the initial idea of a court system on Ethereum is probably still a long way away.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, there's a lot of stuff being tried on Ethereum, and not all of it will succeed, of course. And some of these teams have money to try this forever. Like, usually you have companies that raise a little bit of money in a seed round, then it goes nowhere, and they can't raise any more money. Whereas with a lot of projects in 2017, it's like raise money, have no users, still have a massive war chest for years to come because they don't need to raise again. So I think that's what's happening, where we're seeing maybe projects that are so early, like decade by decades, that is just hanging around because of the fact that they can just fund themselves into perpetuity, basically.
A perfect example of all this is Digex DAO. So again, everyone else is moving to a DAO. They had one for like 3 years, 4 years, and it shut down recently. So they've still got their gold token and their sort of company, but they don't have the DAO and the platform, that voting governance token anymore. At a time when gold is just going into this bull market and all the stars were kind of aligning, and it shut down. So timing is important.
Yeah. I think DAOs, like, I like what I'm seeing, but DAOs today aren't like the grand vision of DAOs, where you have like millions of people in the organization, all self-organizing and stuff. At the moment, DAOs are basically like a few group of friends getting together and being like, let's get some capital together, let's invest in things. It's very early days, exciting, but not something I see going mainstream for a long time.
Yeah, okay. Moving on. ETH futures, you did touch on that already. That is on the Wall Street side of things, but all the way down from more exchanges launching, and there's more places to invest in ETH now, but decentralized DYDX, is it? I did a tutorial on them, I think 2 years ago, and they've started to launch some Bitcoin products, and they're going to have Ether futures next, I believe. And we've got lots of options projects now. So Hedgic, Opium is a new one, and Open. I just love how this space, I think I've said before, I'm really passionate about options and derivatives, and it's all happening on Ethereum. And the guys at Opium, I tweeted them the other day saying, could you add some Ethereum calls? I want to trade these. And they turn around within like 48 hours and say, yeah, we've added them. Like, how cool is that?
Yeah, the option space is definitely heating up on Ethereum. I think that it's very new to a lot of people. Like, it was very new to me as someone who doesn't come from a traditional finance background. And decentralized exchanges are also getting in on the game. There's Deribit, which is growing really, really fast right now on the options side. And yeah, I'm glad to see that they're coming to Ethereum, and like, you can deploy them a lot easier on Ethereum as well, as you mentioned. So, and there's lots of options, and you can use them to. I mean, Open, people use it to basically take out insurance against certain things, like in DeFi as well, which is really cool. Like, they might have a long position somewhere, and they're like, I want to protect this just in case. And it's basically maturing DeFi at such a fast rate that we're having all these products that exist already, but we're just like basically building a parallel financial system. Here's DeFi, cost 1,000 times less to deploy anything you want on it. It's 1,000 times faster than the traditional system. It's growing at a massive rate, and then you have the traditional kind of old, slow system. I know what I'd pick.
and just even like my grand vision of where this goes, the thing that's wrong with the financial system is their derivatives that aren't backed. And when these CLOs, credit loan obligation, these packages, once they start to collapse, that's what you get, these huge financial crisis. Everything that's happening on ETH, it's all connected, and we can tell if it's collateralized, and we can plug in your ledger and build a portfolio, and then you can insure it with options, and you're just going to be clicking a few buttons. Anthony's token sets with the program trading strategies. You're going to be your own hedge fund from your home computer with a ledger. Like, it's just so awesome where it's all heading.
Yeah, exactly. It's basically I guess Brian Sean Adams talks about it a lot, a popular Ethereum guy, the bankless movement, essentially. Like, you don't need a bank to do this stuff anymore. Do it all on your own, from your own home, with a ledger device, which is, it definitely is what people say. It is revolutionary.
And again, building on top of that, we've seen Argent. So a lot of these mobile wallet apps are coming out now that are very user-friendly. You could even be a non-crypto user and download this app, install it. I think you can even buy your crypto with Visa now, or was that another partnership like Edu, I think I saw. But yeah, it's going to be so easy just to on-ramp, buy some crypto, and maybe start earning 8%, and you don't even know that you're like lending stable coins to a DeFi smart contract. You're just getting that yield in a phone app.
Yeah, exactly. Argent's app is a big step forward. Their public, I guess, V1 release that came out, I think it was about a week ago now. That was really great, and they're actually subsidizing the gas fees right now for users for the next few weeks, which is quite insane given how high the gas prices are. But they also, I think, are going to be let you basically pay fees in different tokens. So basically, it lets you pay fees in like DAI or something. It'll still pay the fee in ETH on the protocol level, but it will kind of abstract that away from the user. So you as a user don't actually have to have ETH for gas. You could just pay in any token you want, which is, in my mind, the biggest hurdle right now for user experience. Working on token sets, I deal a lot with customers, and that's pretty much like the number one request we get. It's like, oh, why can't I move my token sets? It's like, oh, did you spend all your ETH buying a token set? And they're like, oh, I did. I'm like, well, you need more ETH for gas now.
Yes, yeah, exactly. No, that is I think there's a few solutions there other than the company paying the Ethereum gas fees for users. There's second layer stuff like we spoke about before. Other things to go on. I mean, we touched on governance and forks a little bit, but getting back to that Aragon situation, what we've seen with the EOS that we talked about, and now Steam it, and they forked their community to Hive, and now Justin Sun and CZ. That all gets back to what you were talking about with the war chest, where Tron and Justin Sun can spend a lot of money, and they've got a lot of power at the moment, and it's a real battle between the community. Are we going to let you do that, or are we going to seize control of users' tokens and everything?
Yeah, I don't know what Justin Sun is doing, to be honest. Like some people call him like a shrewd businessman, and he's just buying all this stuff to consolidate power. But then he goes and does stuff like with the Steam thing, which is just like super weird. And I go on his tweets these days, and like everyone's basically paying out on him. Like no one really, is a fan of him anymore. So it's just some weird things that have gone on. Like obviously a lot of people think Tron is a scam and all that, and like Justin's a scammer and stuff like that. I'm not going to make any accusations, but it's super weird, and I really feel for the Steam community, because it's actually like one of those communities that kind of is quite large, that is separate from, I guess, Bitcoin and Ethereum and DeFi. Like there's not many communities that are separate from that right now that have been going for years, and they basically had to deal with their assets being frozen, all this drama around their blockchain being forked, so they lost access. They had to rebuild their community on Hive. Like these contentious forks don't help anyone. They're really bad from a community perspective. We saw what happened in 2017 with Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, where the community basically split. Like there was a lot of people that went to Bitcoin Cash, and maybe it takes time. Obviously, I think Bitcoin came out ahead, but it takes time to repair that. And I think and on the smaller chains, keeping it as coherent, like keeping the community together, is the most important thing you can do.
Yeah, I think even the Bitcoin Cash example, if 10% of the community want to go down that path, that's kind of the free market. Well, let them do it. But in Justin's case, it's like, I've got this money, I want to buy things. Let's buy the biggest social media platform. But then it's literally a platform and a community that is driven by its users, and the fact it's decentralized, and they're saying no. So he's just sort of fighting against the crypto community. It makes no sense, as you say.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a good point to bring up that the Bitcoin Cash thing is very different to what happened with Steam. That was a kind of like, yes, it was like a lot of fighting, a lot of stuff going on, but like forking is freedom, right? The Bitcoin Cash people forked off because they're like, we want freedom from the Bitcoin people. Essentially, we want to be our own community. Whereas Justin Sun just came in and was basically like, I'm buying this company and I'm going to fork Steam and screw you, all you users, which is just like next level kind of thing.
I think you've just thought up a brilliant t-shirt slogan there. Forking is freedom. There you go.
Yeah, there probably is something like that already. I think that comes from Bitcoin land for sure. But I definitely something to keep in mind when you see these forks play out that aren't controlled by someone like Justin, like these natural ones that play out.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention there was we've been talking about the programmed proof of work and how Ethereum kind of was discussing whether or not to implement a change which would stop the ASIC miners having such a dominance. And we saw that tweet where I think it was a lot of ETH was saying that they were in favor of that, but it turns out it was just the exchanges that would have maybe benefited from that more. And it's very similar to the age-old, well, should have we forked Bitcoin? A lot of the miners were saying they want to do one thing versus the nodes versus the users. So I think that was an interesting point I just wanted to mention, because that it looked like everyone was in favor, but it was the exchanges that have all the ETH that were doing the voting and not the users.
Yeah, so everyone will know this by the name ProgPow, really. Like, it's just short for, I think, programmatic proof of work. But basically, yeah, there was a report done by Adam, I can't remember his last name now, but he put out this long report on Ethereum, and he basically surfaced that I think it was Bitfinex, the exchange, voted with millions of users ETH for this change in kind of like an on-chain poll. And this is why I'm exactly skeptical of on-chain voting mechanisms for, I guess, the base layer protocol. I'm fine with it for things like, Maker having their own governance, mechanism in there. But in terms of like a base layer, you can just see how the exchanges have all the power here, right? They can just vote with user funds and do whatever they want, basically. And that's exactly what happened here. And it just, yeah, as you said, like, there's different groups, like the users, the miners, the nodes, the exchanges, and they're all in a tug of war when this comes to shove. But if the users have their ETH on an exchange and the exchange signals for them, then they can't even say no. Like, the exchange is just doing it for them.
Yeah. I think the final couple of things I want to mention were the EEA, the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance, and this baseline protocol. So this sounds like it's all really good for big business, corporate adoption of the Ethereum public chain. So it's not something I know a lot about, to be honest. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so the idea behind the baseline protocol project, from my understanding anyway, is that they want to get these enterprises that have been working on, I guess, private implementations of Ethereum and blockchains onto the public Ethereum mainnet. And now, to do this, there needs to be kind of two things. There needs to be scalability, and there needs to be privacy. We've seen privacy come online a lot recently with the zero-knowledge proofs, Tornado Cash, like projects like that. And ZK rollups use zero-knowledge proofs as well, so they can even be private too. So that is scalability and privacy in one, basically. And the baseline protocol project is basically, going to these companies and being like, you can go on the public Ethereum mainnet now. You can basically, I guess, baseline all your operations on this neutral settlement layer and be able to interface with different companies without having to, I guess, like, make sure that all your software is compatible, because that's traditionally what costs a lot, is that all these different companies use different systems, like back-end systems that don't talk to each other normally. So they have to build additional systems and all this stuff, whereas Baseline aims to basically have a neutral platform that everyone can just use and be compatible with.
And this is something that I've always thought, like in the healthcare industry, in the pharmacy, when I used to dispense a script, there's a different database at the doctor's surgery who's just done that script, and there's a different if they've just been in a hospital. So we definitely need a new system where everyone has privacy on their health records, but we can pick up if there's a change or the wrong thing has been dispensed, or they've just been changed when they were in hospital 2 days ago, but the doctor and the pharmacist don't know. So there's all these reasons, and that's just one industry and one example where I think this stuff is going to come together really well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm actually pretty excited about it, but it's going to take a while before we see, a major company moving everything to Ethereum mainnet for sure. But it's good that people are working on this and thinking about it already.
Awesome. Well, other than that, I think that's all the points I had. Anything to finish off, Anthony?
No, I think we covered basically all the stuff that's going on. I think next month's update, we're going to have a lot more to talk about with ETH2. There's so many moving parts right now going on, and I expect June to be a really big month for ETH2 with what I've been looking at and what I've seen happening. But yeah, I'm sure we're going to have like plenty more to talk about outside of that as well.
And just a little bonus for those that have listened to the end, there's a few questions about Enigma. So they were another project on ETH that were doing privacy. I think a lot of the team maybe have moved over to a new chain called Secret, and there's talk about what the tokens are going to do, maybe a 1-for-1 or... Anyway, that might be something that we will get more news on in the coming weeks and talk about in next month's episode. But there's, a lot of these token holders from these old projects that are wondering if it's dead or if it's coming back. And there's actually turned out to be a fair bit of good news for some of these old projects that we did like.
Yeah, exactly. There's projects that have been building for years, just been heads down, and people haven't heard about them, but they're re-emerging now with products that they think are ready for the prime time. So yeah, it's going to be exciting to see.
Awesome. Well, guys, hope you've enjoyed that. Share the video around with friends and family. Let us know any topics or questions you got in the comments below. The links to follow Anthony and ETH Hub will be down in the description as well. And yeah, we'll talk to you again soon.
Cheers. Awesome. Thanks for having me again.
Cheers, guys.